Hi guys, so this is the lecture content for week 4, which will center around the topic of nominalization. And if you have already checked the materials online, I've already included a previous tutorial on nominalization, and you will actually find that it's not just nominalizing the verbs. Okay, so in this lecture, as I am recording it, I will try to be as brief as possible because you've got most of the contents from that YouTube video. The feature for this week, following last week's content, will be nominalization. Last week we focused on shell nouns, which is one of the ways that we are going to summarize our ideas through forming complex noun groups with the shell nouns by adding information like adjectives before the shell nouns, or you can add prepositional phrases or relative clauses or participial phrases after the nouns. So this week we move on to talk about how you are going to condense or pack a whole sentence into a noun phrase. So we've got an example on this slide. So the clause goes, fans withdraw the support for the celebrities. And if you want to make it into a noun, you can nominalize the verb withdraw into the noun withdrawal. And the whole noun phrase would be the withdrawal of support for the celebrities. And I'm sure you are familiar with this phrase because it's the definition for a cancel culture, a brief definition for cancel culture. So maybe you can say the definition of cancel culture is the withdrawal of support for the celebrities, or you can say cancel culture refers to the withdrawal of support for the celebrities. So this is how you can use nominalization to combine it with the rest of the sentence to form a new sentence, so to say. And I have emphasized this at the beginning of this video, being that nominalization is a process of turning words that are not normally nouns into nouns. Okay, so that is what it means by nominalizing. Okay. And we've got some very quick exercises we can go over before we move on. So you have the verb migrate, and you have an adjective important, and the conjunction so. In these cases, how are you going to turn them into nouns? So feel free to try out your answers, or maybe we can try it out during the class. Regarding the functions of nominalization in academic writing in particular, I can find 5. Okay, so the first one would be shifting what we call the register, or you may call this style, like how you are shifting from a casual to formal writing, or from more spoken-like expressions to written-like expressions. So if you can imagine a situation where you will use a lot of nominalization, would be in scenarios such as reporting news, giving a speech, but not like engaging in friendly, casual conversations with your family members or your friends, which would sound pretty weird actually. Okay, when you are trying to be too technical, being too bookish, then you would use a lot of nominalization. And the second function would be to create abstract and technical terms. So I think this also has to do with the process of science. As researchers or scientists are doing research, they will record the observations or what they observed and turn it into reports. And along the way, as they are trying to compact their ideas into shorter writings, from time to time they will form terms like jargon. Okay? In the following slides, I will show you some examples. And the third function would be for cohesion, how you are using nominalization to pack ideas from the previous sentences in order to move the text along. And the fourth function would be, of course, very importantly, you're going to condense information and you will achieve summarization and paraphrasing. Okay? And through the process of forming nouns, and we usually describe nouns using adjectives. So when we form more nouns in our writing, it means it's easier for us to comment on them. So that's what it means by the fifth function, that is creating targets for expressing opinions. So this is one of the examples that I obtained from previous writing by some of my students, and I think it was about European histories. So the original sentence went, by the 1840s, millions of people had moved to the cities in Europe where many had no jobs, were poor, hungry, and felt sick. And in this case, if we want to make nouns from the descriptions about the European people in the 19th century, we would say something like unemployment, poverty, hunger, and disease were found in European cities by the 1840s. In this case, as you can find, the focus of the sentence has shifted from people, from European people, like humans, to the phenomena, like how people were unemployed, or how poor the people were, how hungry the people were, and how sick they felt. Okay, so we turn the adjectives into nouns in this case. And you will also find in some cases where we can find no direct substitutes for some expressions or some adjectives. For example, no jobs. Either you can say joblessness, but the more technical way would of course be unemployment. Or felt sick. Sickness would be a little bit casual. So disease would be one of the ways to make your sentence a little bit more technical, okay, more advanced. I'm sure you would love to read a few examples from your own writing. Okay, for example, the public needs to accept gender-neutral toilets more. So I'm not saying this sentence is not good. It's perfectly grammatical. But another way to express this sentence or express the meaning of this sentence may be the public needs or need to increase the acceptance of gender-neutral toilets. Okay, so in this case, the verb accept has turned into acceptance so that we can increase it. Okay, so the adverb more has also turned into something else. So in order to modify acceptance, you need to perhaps use a verb. Or maybe you can say the public needs an increasing in acceptance. Okay? Remember, you can use increase as a noun, increase. Okay? Increase in acceptance of gender-neutral toilets. Another example would be schools should introduce gender-neutral toilets so that they can successfully stifle the dispute. And the resulting sentence can be the introduction of gender-neutral toilets in schools can successfully stifle the dispute. And in this case, you will find that the sentence would become shorter. Okay, by shorter we mean we are using fewer verbs, as introduce has become introduction, and all's left would be the main verb stifle. And in this case, you are combining two shorter sentences or clauses into just one, so as to make your writing more concise, more condensed, cleaner. The process of writing has a lot to do with the process of doing science, so that researchers and scientists would report or describe their experiments or their research in writing. Okay, so if you are familiar with this cycle of scientific processes, we have 5 main stages. Of course, other sources would say there are 7 stages, but I think for consistency or for simplicity, it's good that we stick with 5 for now. So all scientific research starts with an observation, like curiosity. We are curious about what is happening in the world. So for example, some scientists or some researchers would find that some children or adults would feel anxious when they separate with a familiar person. Okay? In order to look for patterns, they will start doing research, like reviewing previous research on this kind of behavior, as in the second stage. So we've got a very famous psychologist called Bowlby. So in 1960, he wrote a review of literature about a condition. Okay, so he said the reason for undertaking a systematic study of the literature arose from the need to relate observations of the behavior of young children on separation. Okay, so this is a research about some behavior when infants, babies, or children are separated from their mothers. And the hypothesis would go, as the psychologist Bowlby would say, the anxiety is a primary response, not reducible to other terms, and due simply to the rupture of attachment to his mother. Okay, so that means anxiety as a kind of emotion was observed by the researchers, and you can't further break this emotion down into smaller parts. So anxiety would be one of the things that they are looking at. Okay, but what happens that induces anxiety? So in Bowlby's another article, I think it's the same article, he said it's because of the rupture of attachment, which means separation. Okay, and is exactly the opposite for attachment. Detachment, separation, okay, and so on. And then moving forward a little bit, because I think there was some experiments going on during the 1980s about having children separated from their mothers and introducing strangers when they were playing in a room. So the experiment, as reported by McCloud, 2018, will be called a strange situation. Okay, so it was conducted when the mother leaves the baby, or the baby will be left completely alone. So after some observations during the experiment, finally the researchers would come up with a report. Okay, because sometimes reports will be very short, will have to be very short. Because of the word limit, they will have to be very concise. So the result can be, for example, in Bowlby's 2021, he says, the anxiety shown on separation of young children from mother is a reproduction of trauma of birth. Okay, so I'm not sure about all the details about this phenomenon or the experiment, but we can see from the initial observation with the adjective denoting the emotion anxious and the action separate, we start coming up with terms or nouns such as anxiety and separation. And with the phrase, the anxiety shown on separation, actually we come up with a more concise term, which is going to be in the next slide. And yes, I'm sure many of you would know that this term is called separation anxiety. And of course, this disorder, so researchers would call it a disorder. It's not confined to young children. And later research will show that separation anxiety disorder, in abbreviation SAD, would happen in adolescents, which means young teenagers and even adults, when they are separated from the familiar objects, people, or even pets. So after talking about the first function of nominalization being a way to shift register, and the second one create terms, we come to the third one, which is to move the text along. And you can find this passage. I actually extracted it from one of your writing, and here it goes. A gender-neutral toilet exists as a kind of toilet that can be provided for anyone to use. In fact, the establishment of gender-neutral toilets has also been criticized. Despite the criticism against this proposal, so I'll stop here. So you can find in the sentence starting with in fact, you already have one very long noun group with a nominalization, which is the establishment of gender-neutral toilets. And then look at how this sentence is finished. It's finished with a verb. Of course, you need a verb to finish this sentence. Has also been criticized. And look at the next sentence. Okay, the verb criticized has turned into a noun, criticism. That is, you are using the nominalized verb to continue the paragraph and start a new sentence with it. So you can see the criticism against this proposal would actually be a rewrite of the previous sentence. And you can see the establishment of gender-neutral toilets has become this proposal. Okay, remember the shell noun. One of the shell nouns that we can use will be proposal. So here is the third function, that is to enhance or to facilitate the cohesion of the paragraph. And of course, we want to write our essays more concisely so that we can leave some more space for examples, for evidence, for arguments. Okay, so look at this example from a student of mine a few years ago. So he talked about the reasons for the refugee situation not being very well in some countries. So he said there are 3 reasons. Refugees are stopped being employed or receiving education. Their professional skills decline because they lack training or work when they have to wait a long time for the refugee status. Their mental health is also unsatisfactory since they have traveled for a long time. So in the original passage, there are four sentences. But if you want to turn it into one sentence, what can you do? You may want to think about it. For a few seconds, you may want to pause the video before you move on to see one of the suggested answers. Here it is. So on the left-hand side, you have the original text, and on the right, you have the three sentences nominalized. So it goes, the reasons include suspension of employment or education career, decline of professional skills due to the lack of training or work during the long refugee status determination process, and unsatisfactory conditions of mental health resulted from lengthy period of traveling. So for the first sentence, refugees are stopped being employed or receiving education, we take out the verb stop and try nominalizing it, but unfortunately we don't have a noun equivalent. Okay, so maybe we can say we put it to a stop, but it's hard to turn it into a nominalization with a lengthy noun group. So we chose a suspension. When we say suspension, we have to move on and say something about employment because we have employed. So we can turn it into employment, another nominalized phrase, or education career. Okay, so maybe you don't have to use career. You simply say suspension of employment or education. In the second sentence, decline can be used both as a verb and a noun. So you can say a decline in professional skills or decline of professional skills due to the lack of training. So the verb lack was turned into the lack. And again, the verb lack can also be used as a verb. Okay, a lack as a noun can also be used as a verb. And in this case, the nominalized lack would have to be followed by the preposition of, so that you can move on and expand the noun group with another noun, like the lack of training or work. And then you have the long refugee status determination process. Okay, so a very long noun phrase. And the last one, unsatisfactory conditions. So the mental health is also unsatisfactory. So sometimes you will have to add words based on your knowledge and experience. And in the original sentence, you don't have the word condition. So you have to put it back to the resulting noun phrase. And you have unsatisfactory conditions of mental health resulted from lengthy period of traveling. So in the second and the third noun phrase, you actually see a different way to talk about cause and effect. So when you are linking two clauses together, showing cause and effect, you can use because or since. But if you are linking two noun phrases causally, meaning you are stating the reasons and results in noun groups, you will have to use due to or because of, or in this case, result from. And you might not believe it when I said when you nominalize, it seems that the resulting sentence would look very complex, but it's actually shorter. So the original text on the left has got 50 words in 4 sentences. But on the right, you have a passage with just 1 sentence and 40 words. So very likely, when you take the effort in nominalizing some sentences, you're actually not just packing information, but you're also trying to write more concisely. But of course, as we will explore more later on, we don't overdo it. Okay, that means when we are writing a paragraph, for example, you will not nominalize everything inside a paragraph. There are certain positions that would require that you are nominalizing sentences or clauses, so that you are talking about the phenomenon more generally, or you are trying to summarize. So in this case, you will find that it's actually a very good strategy or technique for summarization and paraphrasing. So let's move on. So we have another example from you on the topic of gender-neutral toilets at school campuses. Okay, gender-neutral toilets can solve two main problems. With gender-neutral toilets, people can use the toilets more flexibly. In addition, gender-neutral toilets can also make toilet space and toilet time less unevenly allocated for male and female toilets. So I'll focus on the structure more than the content, okay, because I'm not the expert of the issue. But if we look at this sentence on the right, we have something like gender-neutral toilets can increase the flexibility of toilet use and reduce the problem of uneven space allocation and toilet time between male and female toilets. So the original text has 36 words, in 3 sentences. And now the rewritten text would just have 24 words in 1 sentence. Again, this proves that if you manage to nominalize some of the ideas in your text, you can become more concise. Your writing can become more concise. And this one is interesting because when I talk about commenting, evaluation, it's always been an interest, exploring the language for expressing your opinions. As I've already showed you a few examples about lexical harmony in week 2, when we have similar comments being grouped and organized in a paragraph to achieve cohesion. So it's actually the noun phrases describing some social phenomena, social issues that are commented on. Okay, so the more you're able to create nouns or noun groups through nominalization, the more able or the more likely you're going to add comments on your topic. So here is a very simple example about you guys when you learn a language. Okay, so the original sentence go with an action. Students learn a language. Okay, and you can actually pack it into language learning. So the action, learning a language, would become a thing, a topic. By saying thing is actually quite vague, right? But for language learning knowledge or the research about language, we call this kind of actions language learning. Okay, by turning an action into a thing, like language learning in this case, you can then comment on it, like language learning is difficult, or maybe to some it's easy, right? But in many cases, especially in the scientific fields, most of us would look at difficulties, problems, so that we look for solutions and report it to help with teaching or maybe even making the world better. So that's why, in this case, this topic would invite a negative comment when we talk about it in a new sentence. Language learning is difficult. And you will also find that you can turn this sentence into a nominalization. If we want to talk about the problems about language learning, we can say language learning difficulty or difficulty in language learning. But when we put difficulty as a head noun, language learning difficulty becomes a technical term. Okay? And then with this phenomenon as a problem in language learning, we can also combine it with another phenomenon like phonetic writing. Okay? So you can add a comment linking the two phenomena together, such as phonetic writing plays a vital role in language learning difficulty or in solving language learning difficulty. I don't know whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing at the moment here, but at least the adjective vital has a positive meaning, meaning that the first phenomenon stated in the subject, phonetic writing, has importance. Okay, because a thing is important, it is worth discussing. Otherwise, it isn't worth talking about in journal papers or in essays. Okay, so remember, when you are expressing your opinions or when you are deciding on a topic, you have to think about why is it important? Is it problematic? Is it vital? Is it relevant to the current affairs? I've also made up one example based on your writing to illustrate once again how you are making nouns for creating targets for expressing your comments on the topic. For example, some of you said gender-neutral toilets are introduced in schools. So here is a sentence with an action because the verb introduce represents an action perhaps performed by schools. Okay? And in this case, the whole sentence can be packed into a noun phrase, that being the introduction of gender-neutral toilets in schools. Okay? So the focus now has become introduction. Okay? And it more specifically talks about the topic and how this topic is dealt with. So in general, we have gender-neutral toilets, but then it's the introduction of it at school or in schools. Okay, so with the new noun phrase, with a nominalization, you can create a new sentence such as the introduction of gender-neutral toilets in schools can successfully stifle the dispute. Okay, so this topic about introducing gender-neutral toilets invites a comment, that being successfully stifling the dispute. Successful, so it's positive. And to complicate things further, you can actually combine the positive comment into the noun group, like the success in stifling the dispute through the introduction of gender-neutral toilets. And then you can finish the sentence with a verb, facilitates inclusion. Just an example, it doesn't have to be true, but that's the way you can combine more elements into the original noun group as you are nominalizing sentences. But of course, not all sentences can be nominalized, and not all nouns or not all nouns ending with ion means nominalization. Of course, this sounds a little bit complex, but we are not going to complicate things further by discussing further of what it means by, or how we are going to distinguish what is nominalization and what is not, for the moment, for the time being. Sorry. So I hope you have spent some time watching the lecture content, as well as the previous tutorial videos that I have included on YouTube. So after going over the materials, it's good to look at the questions in activity part 1. So I've taken a sample paragraph from a student, and of course I have taken away his or her identity so that you don't know who he or she is. And I've also slightly edited the paragraph so that we can have a more focused discussion on nominalization. So you are going to identify as many nouns that are nominalization from the paragraph. Another question would be, you are going to unpack nominalization. So we are reverse engineer the process. So originally we are packing sentences into noun phrases through nominalization. But now we are going to identify nominalization and try to unpack it into a sentence or into sentences. And then the third question would be about how you are going to shorten a sentence with nominalization so that it looks more concise. And then the last 3 questions would be about will have to require your observation and generalization skills. So those questions are about what the functions are of nominalization in a paragraph. And in a sentence structure, in terms of sentence structure, what changes are happening when you nominalize a sentence? And of course, you will want to observe in what places of a paragraph can you find more nominalization. And the second activity, which is going to happen on Thursday, would be easier on me because I'm not going to think of new activities, but I will ask you to take out your summary writing of Vale and Weymouth's article on cancel culture in university campuses. So how you are going to make your text more concise through nominalization. So I will first demonstrate how you can do it. Okay, so based on the techniques that I have already shown you in the previous slides in the lecture content, and then I will and you will take over. That's what I'm trying to say. You will take over and you will focus on making the solutions from the authors more concise through nominalization. Okay, remember the authors made 4 recommendations, and you will be able to find the recommendations and some comments on those recommendations in 4 separate paragraphs in section 8 of the text. So you have to consider how you can condense the ideas further to make sure your text is concise and look more technical. So a little preview of what's happening in week 5. We'll continue to go over the strategies and techniques for paraphrasing so that you know the do's and don'ts of paraphrasing. Of course, there are things that you don't do when you paraphrase. For example, you don't paraphrase technical terms. If you do, the sentence will look weird and you're not actually talking to the point. And in some cases, you may also create what we call tortured phrases. Okay, and many writers out there, like even scientists out there, would look for tools like Google Translate to translate their ideas from one language to English. And this results in some tortured phrases, and they will think that's a way to avoid plagiarism, but that actually doesn't work. Okay, so I'll show you some examples later on in the class. And we'll also talk more about the strategies of paraphrasing. So aside from nominalization, what else can we use? What other tools we can use to make our writing more concise? Okay, so that's all for the week 4 content. So do spend some time going over all these materials, and I'm sure you can make improvements along the way. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a good weekend, and I'll see you on Monday and Thursday, of course. Take care. Bye.